Hello, my name is Gabrielle, and this is Chloe. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about the difference between North and South Korea. Before we get into the differences, let's talk a little bit about the history. Prior to Japan's invasion of Korea in 1904, they had been a unified country for many centuries. China's world power was declining as Japan's was getting stronger, so in 1945, Japanese military began moving into North Korea. After World War II, the Japanese began leaving and the Russian army started moving in. With the USA's stronghold in southern Korea, it was now Russia versus the United States. Each side wanted control over Korea because of its strategic position in East Asia. In July of 1945, two U.S. military officers were given 30 minutes to decide how to split Korea with the Russians so that the U.S. wouldn't lose the entire country. They chose the 38th parallel, and both Russia and Korea accepted, not realizing that Russia would have similar regime as Japan. In 1948, USA handed over power to South Korea and declared South Korea the Republic of Korea. In 1950, the people of Korea rebelled, and 2.5 million people were killed trying to determine which regime represented the true Korea. Today, a divided Korea still remains. North Korea possesses much of the natural resources, whereas South Korea has most of the fertile agricultural land.
Moving on to cultural starting points. These starting points may offer one way of beginning to decode cultural ways of making meaning. So the ones that are very relevant in our research were high and low context cultures, individualism versus communitarianism, universalism versus particularism, specificity versus diffuseness, sequential versus synchronous time, power distance.
So we're going to identify the cultural starting points of North Korea next. When we're trying to understand their cultural starting points, we do need to first understand Juche. The current leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, and his father and grandfather before him have embraced a national ideology called Juche, which, according to the law school at Columbia University, literally translates to self-reliance. This helps us understand many of their other cultural starting points. Like many other Asian countries, North Korea is a high context country. There is a lot of nonverbal communication and implied meanings. North Korea is a particularist country with a high power distance culture. There are exceptions to all the rules and special privileges given to certain people, whereas others suffer. North Korea embraces a synchronous culture. They place an enormous value on their elderly and believe in a cyclical meaning to life. When a person is found guilty of a crime, not only do they punish, but up to 3 generations of their family can be punished. North Korea is a high power distance country. According to an article in Leadership in a Global Context, the author compares North Korea to China and says, as a culture, they are accepting of the disparity between those in powerful positions and those who aren't in powerful positions. Abuse of power is perfectly acceptable and expected. In the 2008 documentary Children of the Secret State, an undercover journalist documented how well hidden the poverty is that affects lives of families in North Korea. In the documentary, orphaned children are seen scavenging food from the food markets, kernels of rice and rotten fruit. Many of the farmers in the region have been forced by the government to stop growing wheat and corn and instead grow opium for the government to sell to fund their military endeavors. Lastly, there are a few, if any, other countries that have a more communitarianist government than North Korea. Everything is controlled by the government: education, employment, travel, living conditions, and even your haircut. There are only 10 state-sanctioned haircuts for men and 18 for women.
Now let's take a look at South Korea. So, individualism and communitarianism. Koreans have come to understand the long-standing agony, hardship, and oppression they've experienced due to the division of North Korea known as Han. Han is the collective feeling of frustration that's built up in the Korean psyche from suffering so much. The release of this energy or manifestation of Han is seen in the rise of extreme nationalism, incredible work ethic, and intense focus on Korean prosperity. The country is overwhelmingly ethnically homogeneous, with over 96% of all South Koreans sharing the same Korean ethnicity. This common identity provides societal unity and also supports the collectivist orientations of this culture. South Korea's common language also contributes to its communitarianism. Koreans share one language, with approximately 70 million people around the globe speaking Korean. In South Korea, names operate in the reverse of Western cultures. The family name, surname, a second family name shared by all that generation, and then finally their given name. Sharing the family versus the individual name also speaks to this culture's value of collectivism. Moving on to communication. South Korean communication pattern is generally indirect and quite verbose. They tend to rely less on words and are attentive to a speaker's posture, expression, and tone of voice to draw meaning. Speech can be ambiguous as they often understate their point. The purpose of this is to maintain harmony throughout the conversation and prevent a loss of face on either end of the exchange. The concept of face, known as chaemon in Korea, is central in influencing Korean behavior and thinking. This is the quality embedded in most Asian cultures that indicates a person's reputation, influence, dignity, and honor. Chaemon holds importance as the appearance people want to present to others in regard to their status and roles, especially gender roles in family and society. By complimenting a person, showing them respect, or doing something to increase their self-esteem, you give them face. Similarly, people can lose face and save or build face. Therefore, individuals in Korea usually act deliberately to protect their self-worth and perception among peers. Now let's move on to power distance. Confucianism has also been a powerful influence on Korean culture. This way of thinking puts emphasis on the importance of healthy human interactions. It promotes the idea that relationships between people are unequal, with defined hierarchical roles. For example, ruler and subject, husband and wife, father and son. When this natural inequality is accepted and respected, it becomes easier to maintain harmonious, stable relations among individuals, and therefore in the society as a whole. In the social hierarchy, one's position, occupation, and level of education is an indicator of status. However, age is often an overriding factor that determines the level of deference and respect one should be shown. The importance of age is referred to in Confucianism as filial piety. This concept requires people to give their elders and ancestors utter respect, devotion, and reverence. Nowadays, the importance of one's parents is usually stressed more than the ancestors. Let's move on to family. The family unit is an integral part of customs and life in South Korea, in which arranged marriages are common and are regarded as a rite of passage. Divorce was rare but has become more common in recent years. Patriarchal lineage is ubiquitous and links ancestors through the husband's line. The eldest son bears extra responsibility to his family and is supposed that he will care for his parents in their old age. Now let's take a look at South Korea's economy. South Korea's economic freedom score is 74.6, making its economy the 19th freest in the 2022 index. South Korea is ranked 5th among 39 countries in the Asia-Pacific region, and its overall score is above the regional world averages.
So when we look to compare and contrast North Korea and South Korea, they really only have been separated for 70 years, so they do share many similarities. They both believe in loyalty to family and government. Culturally, they are devoted employees. North Koreans have little freedoms, though, whereas South Koreans enjoy much more freedom. North Korea is in big trouble in their economy, whereas South Korea is thriving financially. South Korea's economy is fueled by industry and technology, whereas North Korea's land, although rich in natural resources, is poor in agricultural potential, leaving the country unable to produce the food needed to support its citizens. South Korea has a democratic republic, whereas North Korea has a totalitarian communist government led by 3 generations of the same family. Both are high power distance governments, and both leaders believe that their country's government is the true Korea.
Moving on to the ABC model of cultural intelligence. So this model of cultural intelligence has several components: acquire, build, contemplate, and do.
So per the ABC model, the first thing we need to do is acquire knowledge and build on that knowledge. According to Andy Schmitz, author of Cultural Intelligence Defined, in order to build that mutual cultural intelligence and understanding, both leaders will need to acquire and build on their knowledge of the other person and country. It has been 3 years since Kim Jong-un, supreme leader of North Korea, and the then president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, spoke about diplomacy between the two countries with the ultimate goal of a unified Korea. In March, a new president of South Korea was elected, Yoon Suk-yeol. Yoon Suk-yeol has yet to meet with Kim Jong-un and has taken a rather hard line with North Korea. It will be really important that the two leaders meet in person to begin building their relationship of trust and understanding. The next step in the ABC model is to contemplate your motivation. With the change in leadership, South Koreans have seen a change in the stance and their leaders have taken toward a reunification of Korea. Rather than focusing on missile defense systems, North and South Korea could begin their steps toward conflict resolution by exchanging information about one another. In order to develop empathy, both leaders must see the other party not as an enemy or political figure, but as a person. They must also agree that the motivation for both of their efforts is to finally have a unified Korea. They will both need to make some difficult decisions and difficult compromises, and they will also need to understand what they cannot compromise on. Finally, the ABC model asks us to adapt and perform. Only so much healing and relational building can be done online or with a third party. It will be important to their cultural understanding of each other and ultimate goal of joining forces to begin a series of meetings or mediations. In a perfect world, the former president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, would be a great mediator given his familiarity and previous meetings with the unpredictable North Korean leader. As to where they should meet, perhaps it would be best to hold their first meeting in a neutral place like the United States, or even just starting in the demilitarized zone. That's all for us. Thank you so much. Do you have questions?